They laughed at the old man's ancient toolbox. What he did next left everyone speechless. Those tools belong in a museum, not under the hood of a modern military vehicle, scoffed the young soldier, pointing at the weathered toolbox the elderly civilian was carrying into the motor pool. The entire maintenance bay erupted in snickers as they watched him lay out wrenches that looked like they'd been forged in the Korean War era. But when the diagnostic computers failed and the Humvees remained broken, something happened that made every single mechanic go dead silent. What they discovered about the quiet old man changed everything they thought they knew about fixing machines. Welcome to The Last Witness. Before we begin this story of old school mastery and hard earned respect, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those whose skills transcend any technology. The morning sun blazed over Fort Carson's motor pool as Delta Company's newest mechanics prepared for another day of equipment maintenance. It was Monday morning, which meant dealing with all the vehicles that had broken down over the weekend training exercises. The massive maintenance bay hummed with the sounds of modern military efficiency, computerized diagnostic equipment, beeping, pneumatic tools, hissing, and confident young voices discussing repair procedures they'd learned in technical school just months earlier. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez walked the line, supervising her crew of 20-something mechanics as they tackled a lineup of damaged Humvees. At 32, she'd seen enough overconfident privates to know that book learning and real-world experience were two very different things. But she let her soldiers have their swagger. Today's repairs would humble most of them soon enough. That's when an unexpected figure appeared at the motor pool's entrance. An elderly man, probably in his mid-70s, wearing faded work clothes and carrying what looked like a toolbox from the Carter administration. The red metal box was dented, scratched, and had clearly seen decades of hard use. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just his age, but the fact that he looked completely out of place among all the high-tech equipment and young soldiers. "Look what the cat dragged in," whispered Private Tommy Chen, a 20-year-old from California who'd never worked on anything older than a 2010 Civic before joining the Army. "Is that guy lost?" The old man seemed oblivious to the stares and whispers. He walked with the deliberate gait of someone whose knees had seen better days, but his eyes were sharp as they scanned the motor pool with obvious familiarity. He approached the duty desk, where Sergeant Rodriguez was reviewing maintenance schedules. "Excuse me, Sergeant," he said, in a voice roughened by decades of cigarettes and diesel fumes. "I'm Frank Kowalski. The base commander sent me over to help with your backlog." Rodriguez looked up from her paperwork, taking in the civilian contractor who looked old enough to be her grandfather. "Help how exactly?" "I'm a mechanic," Kowalski replied simply, setting down his ancient toolbox. "Been fixing Army vehicles since before most of your soldiers were born." Before Rodriguez could respond, Private Chen couldn't keep his mouth shut. "No offense, Pops, but these aren't the trucks you worked on back in the day. These Humvees have computerized systems, electronic fuel injection, GPS navigation. You need specialized diagnostic equipment just to talk to the onboard computers." A few other mechanics chuckled. Kowalski just smiled patiently and opened his toolbox. Inside was an array of tools that looked like they belonged in a museum. Socket wrenches with worn chrome, screwdrivers with wooden handles, micrometers that predated digital readouts, and diagnostic equipment that appeared to have been manufactured during the Eisenhower administration. "Son," Kowalski said gently, "engines are engines. Electronics are electronics. The principles haven't changed since I started turning wrenches in 1951. "Yeah, but," Chen started. "But nothing," interrupted Specialist Davis, another young mechanic, eager to show off his technical knowledge. "Look, old-timer, I respect your experience, but we've got diagnostic computers that can pinpoint problems to the exact sensor. We've got digital multimeters, oscilloscopes, scan tools that interface directly with the vehicle's computer systems. No offense, but your toolbox looks like it came from the Stone Age." Kowalski nodded thoughtfully. "Well then, why don't you boys show me what all that fancy equipment can do?" Rodriguez, sensing an opportunity to let her overconfident mechanics learn a lesson in humility, pointed toward a Humvee that had been giving them trouble all week. That M1152 over there has been down for 5 days. Intermittent electrical issues. Sometimes it starts, sometimes it doesn't. We've run every diagnostic we can think of. Chen perked up immediately. We've checked the battery, alternator, starter motor, all the fuses, every ground connection. The diagnostic computer shows no codes. It's like the problem doesn't exist, but the damn thing still won't start reliably. Through every piece of test equipment we have at it, added Davis. Nothing shows up on any of our scans. Kowalski approached the problematic Humvee with the deliberate movements of someone who diagnosed thousands of similar issues. While the young mechanics gathered around expecting to watch him fail, he simply popped the hood and stood looking at the engine for a long moment. Then he did something that made the mechanics exchange puzzled glances. Instead of reaching for any tools, Kowalski placed his hand on various parts of the engine bay, feeling temperatures and vibrations. He listened to something the others couldn't hear. After about 30 seconds, he opened his toolbox and pulled out what looked like a stethoscope from the 1960s. Is he seriously going to use that thing? Whispered Chen. Kowalski placed the ancient diagnostic tool against different points on the engine block, listening intently. Then he moved to the electrical system, using his fingers to trace wire harnesses that the young mechanics had already tested with their digital equipment. There, he said finally, pointing to a connector hidden deep in the engine bay. Your problem's right there, Davis scoffed. We already checked every connector in the electrical system. That one tested fine. Did you check it with the engine at operating temperature? Kowalski asked. Well, no, but heat expansion, Kowalski explained patiently. That connector works fine when everything's cold. But when the engine reaches operating temperature, the metal expands just enough to create an intermittent connection. Your computerized diagnostic can't catch it because the problem only exists under specific thermal conditions. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a simple pair of needle-nose pliers, probably older than everyone watching, and carefully adjusted the connector pins by a few thousandths of an inch. Try starting it now, he said. Chen climbed into the driver's seat, convinced the old man was wasting everyone's time. He turned the key, and the Humvee roared to life immediately. Not just started. It caught faster and ran smoother than it had in weeks. Lucky guess, muttered Davis, though his voice lacked conviction. Let me show you something else, Kowalski said, walking over to another Humvee that had been declared operational but was scheduled for transmission service. This one's about to have transmission problems. Rodriguez checked her maintenance log. That vehicle passed all diagnostics yesterday. Transmission tested normal. Kowalski popped the hood and repeated his listening routine with the ancient stethoscope. After a moment, he shook his head. Torque converter's starting to fail. You've got maybe 2 weeks before it goes completely. Impossible, Chen protested. We ran full transmission diagnostics. Everything checked out. Your computers can only test what they're programmed to test, Kowalski explained. But a failing torque converter makes a specific sound that doesn't always trigger error codes. You learn to hear it after you've rebuilt about 1,000 transmissions. He pulled out a worn piece of paper from his wallet and handed it to Rodriguez. Here's my prediction. In exactly 10 to 14 days, this vehicle will experience complete torque converter failure. The symptoms will be inability to engage drive gear, transmission overheating, and a metallic grinding sound from the bell housing. Rodriguez looked at the paper. It was a receipt from a local diner with Kowalski's prediction written on the back in pencil, dated and signed. You're that confident? Son, I've been listening to transmissions fail for 70 years. They all sing the same song before they die. The young mechanics were beginning to lose their smugness, but Davis wasn't ready to concede. Okay, maybe you got lucky with a couple of guesses. But modern military vehicles are integrated systems. You can't just fix them with feel and intuition. You need computer interfaces, proprietary software, manufacturer-specific diagnostic protocols. Show me, Kowalski interrupted gently. Show me a problem your computers can't solve. Rodriguez pointed to a row of 3 Humvees at the far end of the bay. Those 3 have been down for 2 weeks. Different symptoms, but our diagnostics keep coming back clean. We're waiting for factory technicians to fly in next month. Kowalski approached the first vehicle and began his methodical examination. Within minutes, he'd identified a hairline crack in a fuel injector that was only visible under specific lighting conditions. The second vehicle had a failing oxygen sensor that was still within acceptable parameters, but degrading the engine's performance. The third had a loose ground wire that created intermittent electrical gremlins. Each diagnosis took him less than 5 minutes. Each repair required nothing more than basic tools and fundamental mechanical knowledge. Each problem had been invisible to the computerized diagnostic systems, but obvious to someone who understood how machines actually worked. As word spread through the motor pool about the old man who was solving problems the computers couldn't detect, more mechanics gathered to watch. Staff Sergeant Miller, the motor pool's senior NCO with 15 years of experience, approached Kowalski with obvious respect. "Sir, I have to ask, where did you learn to diagnose like that?" Kowalski was cleaning his hands on a shop rag that had probably seen service in 3 different decades. "Korea," he said simply. "1951 to 1953. Motor transport, 8th Army." The motor pool went quiet. Korea was ancient history to these young soldiers, but they all knew it had been a brutal war fought under impossible conditions. "What kind of vehicles?" Miller asked. "Whatever needed fixing," Kowalski replied. "Jeeps, trucks, tanks, half-tracks. When you're in a frozen foxhole getting shelled by Chinese artillery and your only way out is a broken-down truck, you learn to fix things fast and with whatever tools you can find." Chen, who had been the most vocal skeptic, found his voice. "But how do you know so much about modern vehicles?" "These Humvees didn't exist in Korea." Kowalski smiled, the first real warmth he'd shown all day. "After Korea, I spent 40 years as a civilian mechanic, worked on everything from farm tractors to Formula One race cars. Technology changes, but the fundamentals of internal combustion engines, electrical systems, and hydraulics, those stay the same." "You worked on race cars?" Davis asked, his skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. "Indianapolis 500, 12 years running," Kowalski confirmed. "When a carburetor fails at 200 miles per hour, you don't have time to run computer diagnostics. You better know exactly what's wrong and how to fix it before the car even gets back to the pit." The revelation hung in the air like diesel exhaust. These young mechanics were beginning to understand that they weren't just looking at an old man with outdated tools. They were in the presence of someone who had learned his trade when failure meant death, perfected it when failure meant losing races worth millions of dollars, and maintained those skills for over 70 years. "Master Sergeant Kowalski," Rodriguez said, noting his military rank for the first time, "why didn't you tell us who you were when you first arrived?" Kowalski closed his toolbox with the careful precision of someone who had performed that action thousands of times. "Because it shouldn't matter who I was. What should matter is whether I can help your soldiers get these vehicles back in service." He looked around at the gathering crowd of mechanics, noting how their expressions had changed from mockery to respect. "Besides, you wouldn't have learned anything if I just showed up and started giving orders. Sometimes the best lessons come from being proven wrong." Private Chen stepped forward, looking embarrassed. "Master Sergeant, I apologize for the way we treated you. We were wrong." "No, son. You were protective of your trade and proud of your training. Those are good qualities in a mechanic," Kowalski replied. "But remember this. All that fancy diagnostic equipment is just tools. Tools don't fix vehicles. Mechanics fix vehicles. And the best mechanics are the ones who understand their machines so well they don't need a computer to tell them what's wrong." 3 weeks later, Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski began showing up at Fort Carson's motor pool every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Word had spread quickly through the base about the Korean War veteran who could diagnose problems that stumped modern diagnostic equipment. What started with Chen and a few curious mechanics quickly grew into something much larger. Kowalski didn't just teach diagnostic techniques, though his mechanical instruction was a revolutionary. He taught patience, respect for the equipment, and most importantly, the mindset of a mechanic who understood that every repair could mean the difference between mission success and mechanical failure in combat. The young mechanics learned to listen to their vehicles, to feel for problems with their hands, to diagnose by understanding rather than by relying solely on computer readouts. But more than that, they learned to approach their craft with the reverence Kowalski showed for every machine that crossed his workbench. These vehicles will carry your brothers into combat, he would tell each new group of students. They'll bring them home safely if you maintain them properly. Every bolt you turn, every connection you make, every system you repair, it's not just fixing a machine, it's protecting lives. 6 months after that first day in the motor pool, Delta Company posted the highest vehicle readiness rates in the division's history. Private Chen, Kowalski's first and most dedicated student, earned his senior mechanic certification and was selected for advanced propulsion systems training. But more importantly, every mechanic who trained with Kowalski carried forward a deeper understanding of their profession and their responsibility to the soldiers who depended on their work. Kowalski still comes to the motor pool every Tuesday and Thursday. He still brings that same weathered toolbox, still handloads his own shop rags, and still outdiagnoses computer systems that cost more than most people's houses. But now, instead of mockery, he's greeted with the respect due a master craftsman passing on his knowledge to the next generation. The young mechanics have learned that sometimes the oldest tools in the hands of someone who truly knows how to use them can outperform any modern technology. And sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones who look the least like what you'd expect an expert to be. The motor pool at Fort Carson has a small sign now mounted above the main work bay where Kowalski set up that first day. It reads, "Dedicated to Master Sergeant Frank Wrench Kowalski, who taught us that computers diagnose, but mechanics understand." Kowalski never asked for the sign, and he never mentions it when he arrives each Tuesday and Thursday morning. He just sets up his tools, opens that ancient toolbox, and continues to show young mechanics what mastery looks like. Because that's what teachers do. They pass on their knowledge to those who need it most, whether those students know they need it or not. Master Sergeant Kowalski's predicted transmission failure occurred exactly 12 days after his diagnosis, just as he'd written on that diner receipt. The young mechanics who had doubted him were the first to acknowledge that some kinds of knowledge can't be programmed into a computer. They can only be earned through decades of dedication, one repair at a time. Now I ask you, have you ever met someone whose old-fashioned methods proved superior to modern technology? Someone who was underestimated because their tools looked outdated, but whose knowledge ran deeper than any computer program? Share their story in the comments below. Because at The Last Witness, we believe that true expertise isn't about having the newest equipment. It's about understanding your craft so completely that the tools become extensions of your knowledge and experience. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, subscribe, share, and help us keep alive the voices of those whose skills transcend any technology. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, the next time you see someone working with tools that look ancient, watch their hands. You might be witnessing mastery that no amount of modern technology can replace.